Will Bryan Walshe plead guilty to second-degree murder? It's a good question. Let's talk about it. Here's what we're talking about today. The state has a good case, but given the allegations of corruption, the problems with the Massachusetts State Police, and the fact that they have no body to prove how Mrs. Walsh died, that creates problems for them. The unavailability of a body means that they can't prove whether she was shot, stabbed, or poisoned, or just dropped dead from a heart attack. There's no way to prove that. He could stand up and swear on a stack of Bibles that she just keeled over dead after they finished having an argument. Now, I don't think anybody would believe that, given his past and given all of the incentives that run toward him. But the fact is, if you can't prove how somebody died, how do you know that they were murdered? And he could very easily claim that he was just scared to death that he was going to go to prison anyway for the fraud. So maybe, he wanted to make sure he didn't go to prison for having killed his wife when, she slipped on a banana peel and hit her head, or whatever other ridiculous argument somebody wanted to make like that. Even if it's a remote possibility, the possibility of a natural death could establish some degree of reasonable doubt. Now, I'm not saying that I would have reasonable doubt given what I know about this case, but there are people who would have reasonable doubt in that situation. Now, you're probably thinking, well, what about all the blood that they found? Large amounts of blood could easily be explained by the need to dispose of the body, and he took a particularly brutal and terrible way to go about doing that. But there's no evidence that anyone can point to that shows, again, that he actually killed her. While it's inferable under the circumstances, if the jury is required to abide by the proof beyond a reasonable doubt standard, I could see them coming back with a second-degree murder conviction or even a manslaughter conviction if Walsh was compelling in his testimony under the circumstances. Now, keep in mind that Bryan Walsh convinced art buyers that the paintings he was selling them were originals. They were original, and as a result, they should pay this discounted price. He's very good at weaving a tale, apparently. And we know that because those people paid the money. And they didn't discover the fraud until they had an expert review the paintings. So that puts a little bit of different light on the situation. And that's something that I think could work for him. As I've said many times when I've talked about fraud, the people who are really good at it are very believable and they come across very sincere. In fact, there's an old adage that says, when you can fake sincerity, you've got it all. And indeed, I think Bryan Walsh probably is very good at faking sincerity. So take that for what you may. So the state has some degree of risk. While it looks like trials have no costs for the state, while the judge is hung up doing this murder trial, she can't be handling other things like contract disputes, misdemeanors, injunctions, and things like that. So there's an opportunity cost for the court. And of course, somebody has to pay for the court clerks and the courtroom security. The state has to pay for the cost of transportation of the defendant back and forth from jail. And then you have to pay for the prosecutors and all of the expert witnesses and all of the forensics. So the costs are not inconsequential. And because trials do not move in a predictable way, there are long delays. You can tell a witness that they're going to testify around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they may not be actually available to testify until 2 days from then, based on how things sometimes get hung up with objections and that sort of thing. So when you have an expert witness and he's sitting on the bench waiting to testify, the meter is running the whole time. and that can also cost the state some money. So the state has some limited incentives to work out a deal, primarily just to get back probably a good month to 2 months of their time in making sure this case goes away for good and that he goes to prison. I don't look for Walsh to plead if he gets rulings that go his way during the trial. If, for example, the judge excludes evidence of the dismemberment, because he's already pleaded guilty to that, and he's already pleaded guilty to getting the uh, body disposed of, the judge in that situation might very honestly decide that that's not relevant. Because when the other charges were on the block, in other words, when those were up to be decided by a jury, the dismemberment issue was live. But the dismemberment occurs after the murder, or the alleged murder in this case. And so, because it is extremely prejudicial and not relevant to the manner in which she was killed, if she was killed at all, that creates an issue where the judge could, if she wanted to, just on the basis of relevance, exclude it. And it's not a prior bad act, it's a contemporaneous bad act. It happens in sequence after the supposed murder, but there has to be a tie between that and the murder. And I don't know that the prosecution can necessarily establish that. So again, you've got this relevance issue, you've got whether or not she might think of it as a prior bad act. Uh, Who knows what other reasons the defense might argue to keep that information out. And if they keep that information out, then the jury is stuck with there's this lady and we don't have a body, and there's no telling what the decision would be in that situation. So he might very well have a good reason to go to trial in that situation. But I don't think this judge is easily put over on, and so I don't think she's necessarily going to exclude that evidence. But it is a strong possibility that it could happen, or at least that the motion could be made. So again, there are so many uncertainties at this point that the uncertainties balance on both sides. Both Bryan Walsh and the state have things that create doubt for them as to whether or not they will be successful. And that is usually the time when people decide to settle a case, or in this case, plead a case. And I believe the state would probably allow a plea for second degree murder. I don't think they'd go for manslaughter, but I think they would allow a plea for second degree murder, and that could work. But given the fact that there are evidentiary issues that are going to be raised and they're probably going to be decided in the next week prior to trial, by the time those lawyers step into that courtroom on December 1st, if that's indeed the day that it goes, when they step into that courtroom, you can believe that they are going to know everything about the other side's case and whether or not there is risk to the state and whether or not there's risk to Bryan Walsh. So you're probably wondering, well, why would he plead? Why would he plead? Why would he not just, force it out? Because maybe he could get a manslaughter conviction. Maybe he could get something much less than murder. And that's true. And he can certainly argue that they can't prove anything and that he didn't do anything. He would probably need to take the stand and talk about what he thinks happened or what he saw happen. Whatever line he wanted to give the jury, he would have to stand up there and take it, and then he would wind up having to be cross-examined with it. And he also has something else to think about, and this is important. He has to think about his children. He has 3 children. I think 2 of them are still in elementary school. The children are in school, and they're not going to be able to escape hearing about it. Children can be cruel. They can say, I heard your daddy killed your mommy. All kinds of stuff like that. And he has to be sensitive to that. He has to know that that kind of trauma and turmoil is coming for them. And it might get a lot worse particularly if this trial is live streamed and there are bad images that are shown that wind up making it into the public domain. If that kind of thing happens, then again, he has the possibility of completely eliminating any chance of ever having any kind of relationship with his children. And he may want to have a relationship with them, he may not want to, but he probably doesn't want to see it completely obviated. So, for that reason, I think there is some incentive just to protect his children as to why he might want to take a plea for second-degree murder. And then you have to consider this. He has a history of pleading guilty when he knows he can't win. Look at the art fraud case. When it came time to put up or shut up, and they put jurors in a courtroom to listen to the evidence, he folded up like a cheap suit. His counsel got him a good deal, and he was happy to take it. But more importantly, he pleaded guilty to the other crimes in this case without a plea deal, an open plea. So we know that Walsh is not stuck in the mud with going to trial. He's willing to plead if it benefits him in some way. And I suspect that in many ways it would benefit him. The major reason he would plead a second-degree murder as opposed to murder one is because he gets a chance at parole. While the judge could give him life without parole, that's within her discretion. Bryan is a fellow who conned people out of money for fake art. He's a confidence man. He's probably betting he can throw his kids in front of the judge and under the bus, and like the boy who murdered his parents and threw himself on the mercy of the court because he was an orphan, he can plead to be able to be a great parent while he's in prison and one day be a part of their lives again. Because if he gets life with parole, then usually after 15 years or so, he can start appealing to get parole through the state system. And Massachusetts is a far more liberal jurisdiction than many other places, and he could probably wind up getting something similar to the general punishment for manslaughter. So, right now, I'm going to put the odds at 50% that if the state is willing to take a plea to second degree murder, that he'll jump at the chance like Michael Jordan in the NBA playoffs. Of course, there are all kinds of nuances in sentencing. He may think he can twist the female judge around his fingers. Many people see female judges as more liberal and weaker on crime. But of course, the ability to be merciful is not a weakness, it's a strength. It's a myth that female judges are weak on punishment or the law. And that's especially true in a case like this here. And if he thinks he can manipulate her through his children, he's likely mistaken. She, more than others, would know what the children have lost, as well as what their mother has lost. But confidence men tend to have the confidence that they can put a cobra to sleep with their words. And that's what he would be trying to do. His lawyer, if he was smart, would write the allocution speech and the plea for mercy for him so it wasn't explicitly manipulative. My guess is Walsh won't listen to him or let him. People who display tendencies like his want to be in complete control of everything, especially when it's unwise. So, will he plead guilty if he's offered second-degree murder? Will the state offer it? I don't know, but it's interesting to think about. So, let me know what you think. Do you think he'd plead guilty? Do you think he would accept a 15-year possibility that he might get out in 15 years while he still has some little bit of life left? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you being here today. If you have the opportunity today, try to do one kind thing to help somebody else. Any kind thing will do. Buy somebody a Coke, get them a cup of coffee, anything that makes their day better. That would be a way to help make the world a better place. Because after all, isn't that what we're all after? Now, YouTube has a few things that they think you might be interested in, and they're going to be showing you that right up there.